There's an elderly black woman just sitting there on her porch, and it doesn't feel right. That's all the white neighbor had to say. And within minutes, 2 police officers showed up, hand on gun, ready to investigate. No weapon, no threat, just a 76-year-old woman, sitting quietly on her own front porch, a cold cup of tea in her hand, her eyes following the sparrows on the power line. But with her skin color, stillness became suspicion. They told her to stand. She had done nothing wrong. Then they threatened to use force. But what they didn't know was that the woman they tried to intimidate wasn't just any old lady in a chair. She was a mother of a high-ranking officer in the Department of Homeland Security, and her silence forced an entire system to speak. Which state are you watching this from? In your town, can a black woman sitting still be treated like a threat? And if a 76-year-old can't even rest in peace, what does that say for the children she raised? Welcome to Mr. Seven Stories, where true justice stories are never left in the dark. Let us know where you're tuning in from. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, subscribe, and follow for more. Because today's story starts with a rocking chair and shakes an entire town awake. This is the journey of Evelyn Mae Carter. And you're about to see why she never had to stand up to make the whole country listen. In Brookridge, South Carolina, time didn't pass. It settled like dust on the wooden railing of an old porch chair. Beneath the September sunset, the 2-story house at 412 Sycamore Street wouldn't stand out to a stranger. Weathered white painted walls, a wide porch supported by aging wooden columns, and a quiet rocking chair facing the street. But for Evelyn Mae Carter, age 76, a black woman who had lived her entire life on this land, the porch wasn't just a seat. It was where she watched her husband return from war, where she raised 3 children into adulthood, where she wrote hundreds of handwritten letters to the city council demanding clean water, working electricity, and basic respect. It was where she clutched her chest in silent grief the day she learned her youngest son didn't survive his heart condition. And it was where she held her head high against wary glances as the neighborhood began to shift. White fences rising, unfamiliar faces moving in, and memories slowly painted over. Each evening, Evelyn sat there in her lavender print cotton dress, feet tucked into worn slippers. On the small table beside her, a steaming cup of chamomile tea, a weathered Bible, and a chipped radio that still hummed slow jazz without fail. Every gentle push of the chair let out a creak, as if reminding her that life was still quietly moving, and she was still here. This house, this neighborhood, was a lifetime. Some days, children passed without so much as a glance. Joggers crossed the street to avoid her eyes, as if Evelyn's presence posed a question they didn't want to answer. But she didn't mind. She'd lived long enough to know that living didn't mean being loud. It meant staying. She didn't sit to be seen. She sat so she wouldn't be erased. Brookridge was once a close-knit black community where churches, schools, and porches blended into one shared space. Evelyn remembered the sound of Easter hymns at night, the laughter of children skipping along the sidewalks, and neighborhood meetings held by the glow of oil lamps. But those sounds had since given way to SUV doors slamming, electric lawnmowers buzzing, and neighbors calling each other by names she'd never heard before. And even at 76, with her back aching when the weather turned and her eyesight dimming with age, Evelyn Mae Carter remained, like an old oak standing firm through every storm. She didn't need to go anywhere. This ground, this porch, bore witness to everything she had endured and everything she still preserved. It wasn't just a chair. It was a declaration. And then, on an afternoon that seemed no different than the rest, Evelyn had no idea the heavy footsteps of the past would find their way back to that porch, this time clad in uniform and bearing suspicious stares. But she wasn't afraid. She'd been preparing for that moment her entire life. That afternoon, the air in Brookridge felt thick, like a heavy quilt pressing against her chest. Evelyn sat as always, fingers gently lifting the cup of chamomile tea, her eyes following a sparrow flitting along the power line. On the porch steps, the peonies she had planted as a young woman still bloomed a soft lilac, though no one tended to them anymore. Across the street, behind a powder-white picket fence, Brooke Whitman was walking her corgi. She was in her early 30s, living in a newly renovated home with a European-style porch and an automated sprinkler system. Every afternoon, she passed by Evelyn's house, and each time, her gaze inevitably lingered on the old rocking chair, as if it didn't quite belong. Today was no different. Brooke paused, silently observing. Evelyn didn't look back, but she knew that gaze, the kind people give to something that unsettles them, though not enough to justify removing it. Brooke's eyes flickered with unease, then hardened into resolve. She tugged the leash, stepped back a few paces, and pulled out her phone. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice rang clear on the line. Yes, I live on Sycamore Street, number 408. There's an elderly woman. I don't know her name. She's been sitting for a very long time on the porch across the street. She just keeps staring out at the road. It's a little strange. I'm not sure what's going on, but she doesn't seem okay. She might be scoping the neighborhood. Maybe. I don't know, but I thought someone should check, just in case. Brooke's voice trembled slightly, not from fear, but to make a concern sound legitimate. On the other end, the dispatcher needed only a few keystrokes. Suspicious behavior. Elderly. Possible welfare check. Dispatch nearest unit. A few blocks away, a Brookridge County Sheriff's cruiser silently turned onto Sycamore Street. No lights. No siren. Meanwhile, Evelyn remained unaware. Her fingers traced the cracked rim of her porcelain teacup, eyes half-lit beneath the fading light, filtering through the trees. She had no idea that just by sitting still, just by being present, she could become a target, that an old black woman in an old chair could cause alarm at the eyes watching her held too much prejudice and too little understanding. From her yard, Brooke watched the police car come to a slow stop in front of Evelyn's porch. Her chest tightened, a blend of apprehension and something else. Satisfaction, maybe both. She turned back into her house, closing the door like someone who fulfilled their civic duty. Outside, Evelyn heard the engine shut off. She lifted her head. Eyes that had witnessed marches, funerals, laughter, and loss now saw two uniformed figures approaching, and she understood what was about to unfold wasn't going to be a conversation. The slam of the cruiser door shattered the stillness on Sycamore Street. Two officers stepped out of the black and white patrol car, their boots striking the pavement like a drumbeat heralding something unkind. Brent Halvorson, tall, broad-shouldered, around 40, with a stiff military haircut, led the way. Behind him was Cody Wexler, younger, mid-20s, eyes still unsure, like he hadn't yet grown into the uniform. Both wore sunglasses, but only one of them had that cold, steely stare beneath the lenses. Evelyn May Carter remained seated in her rocking chair, hands resting gently in her lap. The tea in her cup had long gone cold. As the two officers approached, she didn't flinch or show surprise. She merely tilted her head slightly, as if receiving an uninvited visit she had long anticipated. "Good evening, ma'am," Halvorson said, his voice gravelly but coated in formality. "We receive a report of suspicious activity at this address." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Suspicious activity? Her voice was calm, neither sharp nor soft. "I'm sitting on my porch, drinking tea, like I've done every evening for the past 30 years. Wexler stepped up, glancing around the porch. "Someone said you were staring into neighbors' windows. Is that true?" Evelyn exhaled softly, brushing a silver strand of hair from her forehead. "I was watching the sparrows. I was observing the sky. If someone feels threatened by a 76-year-old woman holding a cold cup of tea, they may want to examine themselves before calling the police." Halvorson smirked. "We're going to need you to stand and answer a few questions, ma'am." "You're asking them now," Evelyn replied, "and I'm answering. I have nothing to hide, and no reason to leave the porch of my own home." The air thickened. Halvorson removed his sunglasses, and his stare sharpened like a blade. "Let me be clear, Mrs. Carter. If you don't comply, we are authorized to escort you to the station for further questioning. This is a lawful request." "A lawful request?" Evelyn repeated, her gaze never leaving his. "Based on a phone call from a neighbor who's never spoken to me? Based on her discomfort with my skin color? Or maybe just her irritation at the sight of a black woman who refuses to disappear from this neighborhood?" Wexler shifted uneasily, stepping back a little. Maybe he hadn't expected things to escalate this far. But Halvorsen was different. He inhaled his patience, fraying. "This is your final warning. Either you get up and come with us, or we will use force." Evelyn placed both hands on the wooden arms of the chair, but not to rise. She tightened her grip, as if drawing strength from the aged timber. "If you want to arrest an old woman for sitting quietly on her own porch, go ahead. But know this, people are watching." Halvorsen glanced around. Sure enough, a few window blinds down the street had shifted. Neighbors were watching silently. A security camera above Brooke Whitman's porch light blinked red, recording every second. He clenched his jaw, his confidence wavering for a brief moment. The silence that followed was heavier than any command. And Evelyn, the black woman with a straight spine and eyes like deep water, remained seated unmoved. That stillness, that resolve, reflected back at the men in uniform like a mirror. And in that reflection, they were forced, for a moment, to reckon with their own conscience. The evening breeze swept down Sycamore Street, rustling the turning maple leaves. But the air on Evelyn May Carter's porch was thick, heavy, as if time itself had paused. Halvorsen remained planted, one hand hovering near the weapon on his belt, his gaze steady and confrontational. Cody Wexler had now backed away, eyes darting toward neighbors peeking out from behind curtains, cell phones in hand. Evelyn said nothing more. No arguments, no pleas, no explanations. She simply sat, back straight, hands resting on the armrests, chin held high, as if she weren't in an old rocking chair, but on the throne of a defiant past. Halvorsen scowled, as if baffled that a woman pushing 80 could challenge his authority with nothing but silence. "I'm not going to say it again, Mrs. Carter," he said, voice tightening. "This is an official order." Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them slowly. Not a single wasted movement. She didn't resist. She didn't defy. She simply didn't rise. And that, more than words, seemed to infuriate Halvorsen. Suddenly, from across the street, a young voice rang out. "Miss Evelyn!" It was Elijah Moore, the little boy from the new black family down the block. He was around 10, straddling a red bicycle, holding up a watercolor drawing. "I drew this for you," he shouted, running toward her with the paper in hand. "Stop right there." Halvorsen barked. "This area is restricted." The boy froze mid-street, wide-eyed with fear. Wexler glanced over, clearly unsettled. "Brent, he's just a kid." But Halvorsen had already drawn his baton, pointing at the child. "I said stop." And in that instant, the whole block seemed to hold its breath. Evelyn stood up, not out of fear, not to retreat, but for the child. "Go home, Elijah," she said gently but firmly, her eyes never leaving Halvorsen. "This is not something you need to see." Elijah hesitated, but then a voice called from behind him. "Elijah, come here!" It was his mother, Tamika Moore, running up the sidewalk with her phone, already recording. Other neighbors, too, began filming. Halvorsen clenched his fist, suddenly aware that he stood beneath the full gaze of the street and its lenses. He hadn't laid a hand on anyone, but he knew he was already on trial. Evelyn sat back down, slow and steady, as though she had never left that chair. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "If you want to arrest me, do it right here in front of this whole town." Wexler backed away toward the cruiser, head bowed. Halvorsen stood frozen for a beat longer, then turned without a word. He hadn't lost, not officially, but he knew this time he hadn't won either. And on that old porch, bathed in the red glow of sunset, a woman remained seated, like a lighthouse refusing to yield against crashing tides of prejudice. The wail of a siren echoed from the end of Sycamore Street, like a signal no one expected. A sleek black SUV turned the corner, gliding past moss-covered porches, and came to a smooth stop in front of 412 Sycamore, the home of Evelyn May Carter. The door opened, and a tall man in plain clothes, bearing the quiet authority of someone long acquainted with power, stepped out. It was Marcus D. Carter, commander with the Department of Homeland Security for the Southeastern region, and Evelyn's son. His black leather shoes struck the sidewalk like a quickening heartbeat. echoing the tension of those watching. His gaze swept the scene, his mother still and steady in her rocking chair, the two officers nearby, one with his hand stiffly near his belt, the other nervously inching backward. He didn't speak immediately. He just walked up the porch steps, eyes meeting his mother's. Evelyn gave a slight nod, not to calm him, but to pass the baton she had been carrying for the past hour in quiet resistance. "What's going on here?" Marcus asked. His voice was deep, steady, but carried the full weight of command. Brent Halvorsen looked up, brow furrowed. "This area is being addressed. We have the authority to remove civilians from a location if there's suspicion of unusual activity." Marcus didn't flinch. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a slim leather wallet, flipping it open to reveal a gold-etched badge. "Commander, Department of Homeland Security, Region 6, Marcus D. Carter. I oversee internal investigations into civil rights violations across this region, from North Carolina to Florida," he said evenly, his eyes locked onto Halvorsen's. "And what I see here is a 76-year-old black woman sitting on her front porch, being confronted and threatened by two armed officers for looking suspicious." Cody Wexler stepped back again. Halvorsen froze, trying to appear calm, though sweat had already soaked through the back of his shirt. Marcus continued, his voice like a prosecutor reading charges. "Let me ask directly. Do you have a warrant? Any photographic evidence? A single witness who observed anything illegal other than a woman sitting in a rocking chair?" Halvorsen swallowed hard and muttered, "We received a call from a neighbor. They said they felt unsafe. And that's enough for two armed men to interrogate an unarmed elderly woman?" Marcus cut in. "You are embarrassing this department and turning this town into the center of federal inquiry if you don't walk this back." Silence fell like a curtain. Neighbors who had been filming secretly now raised their phones out in the open. Across the street, Elijah, the boy with the drawing, stood wide-eyed. Halvorsen looked around, then growled, "We'll report the incident to our superiors." "You should," Marcus replied, pulling out his phone, "because I'm calling the state inspector general and the governor's office of South Carolina right now." Evelyn looked at her son, her eyes filled not with shock or anger, but with quiet pride. He wasn't just an official. He was a product of dusty southern summers, of nights spent listening to her read, of every time she had said, "You don't need to shout, just stand tall." Marcus turned to his mother and said softly, "I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner." Evelyn smiled, no bitterness, no blame. "You came right on time, as always." And on that porch, with the afternoon sun casting long shadows, a mother remained seated, and a son stood tall, like two silent pillars holding back the storm of prejudice that had come knocking. That evening, before the sun had fully set, the first video hit Facebook. A 2-minute and 43-second clip, filmed from behind a fence across the street, showed an elderly woman seated in stillness as two white officers loomed, their posture and tone loaded with pressure. And then a tall man entered the frame, Marcus D. Carter. And in those final moments, the balance shifted. The badge in Marcus's hand, the steadiness of his voice, and the sharp precision of his questions to the officers. Everything was caught on camera. The footage didn't need editing. It was clear enough to catch the tremble in Cody Wexler's stance, sharp enough to see the beads of sweat gathering on the back of Brent Halvorsen's neck. Then came a second video, then a third, different angles, filmed by different neighbors. No one said a word, but everyone recorded. Within just 12 hours, the video spread at an unimaginable pace. On Platform X, a local account posted it with the caption, "My grandma used to say, 'Don't get up from your chair unless your heart tells you it's time.'" Evelyn Carter didn't stand, and the whole system shook. The post garnered over 200,000 shares overnight. The news caught like wildfire on dry grass. WNQC in Columbia. South Carolina was the first to report it. Then came bigger outlets, CNN, MSNBC. Even the BBC ran it as a headline story. They called it the Porch Stand. The next morning, the porch still held the same old rocking chair. Evelyn sat in it, wrapped in her plum-colored cardigan. But this time, media cameras waited quietly across the street, respectful, not intrusive, simply bearing witness. A clip from the early morning press conference held by the Brookridge County Sheriff's Office aired statewide. After reviewing the incident footage, the police department confirms that the actions of officers Brent Halvorsen and Cody Wexler during their approach to resident Evelyn May Carter violated standard conduct protocols. Both officers have been placed on indefinite suspension pending internal investigation. Soon after, the Brookridge Ledger ran a bold headline: "The woman, the chair, and a system on edge." But it wasn't just the media that stirred. At St. Mark's Baptist Church, Pastor Ellis led a special prayer service for those souls who never raise their voice, yet still make justice listen. On the stained glass window, someone had taped a printout of Evelyn sitting in the sunlight, a modern icon of quiet strength. That evening, Marcus returned to Porch, his steps just as resolute as the first time. In his hand was a sheaf of printed papers. "An official apology from the police department," he said, "and an invitation for you to speak at the city council meeting next week." Evelyn didn't open the envelope. She just looked at her son, then at the empty chair beside her. "Sit down, baby," she said. "Sometimes the first victory doesn't happen at City Hall. It happens right here, in your neighbor's eyes, and in how they start relearning what it means to see someone like me." Marcus sat quietly, just like on those April nights long ago, when he was a little boy listening to his mother read letters from the civil rights movement. Now, he was the one writing the next chapter, from the same old porch, where no one would ever dare overlook a seated black woman again. 1 week after the Porch incident, Brookridge was no longer the quiet town it used to be. Conversations in cafes, churches, and supermarkets all revolve around Evelyn May Carter and what had happened on her front steps. But for Marcus D. Carter, her son, and the Southeast Regional Director of Homeland Security, the most troubling part wasn't his mother's sudden notoriety. It was the stories, the ones that had started to surface publicly. At a community meeting held at St. Mark's Baptist Church, one resident after another stood up to share experiences of racial bias they had endured. Luther James, 68, recalled being denied service at a restaurant, even after having a reservation. Angela Moore, an elementary school teacher, spoke about how white students were favored for extracurricular opportunities. These stories weren't new, but for the first time, they were being told aloud in front of a full room. Marcus listened, the weight of it all settling deep in his chest. He realized then his mother's story was just the tip of an iceberg named systemic racism. Then, something unexpected happened. Brooke Whitman, the neighbor who had called the police on Evelyn, appeared at the meeting. She walked up to the podium, her eyes darting between remorse and fear. I didn't realize what I was setting in motion," Brooke began, her voice trembling. "I just thought something felt off. But now I understand that feeling came from a bias inside me I hadn't questioned." The room went still. Some faces showed anger, others reluctant compassion. Brooke bowed her head and stepped down without saying more. Evelyn, seated in the front row, showed no visible reaction, but Marcus saw her fingers tighten around the armrest of her chair, her only sign of restraint. After the meeting, Marcus leaned down beside her. "Do you want to say anything?" he asked gently. Evelyn shook her head. "I don't need to speak. My presence has said enough." Marcus understood. His mother didn't want to be a spokesperson. She wasn't looking to educate or command. She only wanted to live her life, on her porch, in her home, just as she had for 76 years. But in her silence, she had become louder than most. She became a symbol, not because she spoke, but because she remained. The air inside St. Mark's still carried the scent of cologne, sweat, and unspoken emotion. When Brooke Whitman quietly left the podium, many thought that was it. A brief confession, then gone like chalk dust on a board. But it wasn't over. Minutes later, she returned. This time, Brooke no longer trembled. She held a crumpled sheet of paper in her hand, her eyes fixed on Evelyn, still seated in the front row, dignified, silent, but anchoring the room like gravity. I'd like to say something more," Brooke began. "I'm not here expecting forgiveness right away, but I came because I need to say this clearly without dodging it." The room was silent, save for the gentle whir of the ceiling fan and the quiet scratch of pens from a few local reporters. That day when I called the police, I didn't see a woman sitting on her porch drinking tea, Brooke continued, her voice starting to crack. I saw something unfamiliar. Unfamiliar enough that I reacted as if that unfamiliarity was a threat. She looked down at her wrinkled sheet of paper, then back up. But unfamiliar isn't a reason, and fear is an excuse. A few murmurs echoed from the back of the church hall. An elderly man near the wall nodded slowly. A teenage boy in the corner folded his arms, eyes sharp and focused. I want to apologize to Mrs. Evelyn May Carter, Brooke said, her voice firmer now. I'm sorry for putting my personal comfort above her right to exist peacefully. I was wrong. All eyes turned to Evelyn. She didn't rise right away. She gently set her teacup down on the floor, then slowly stood with the help of her cane. The warm light caught her neatly pinned silver hair like a quiet halo. Ms. Whitman, she said, her voice steady as a prayer at dusk, I hear the remorse in your words, and I accept your apology. A wave of relief swept through the room. But I want everyone to hear this, she continued, turning to face the crowd. Fear is not a reason. And comfort should never be an excuse. No one spoke. Evelyn stepped toward Brooke, stopping at arm's length. I don't need you to bow your head, she said softly. I need you to look truth in the eye. And I hope that from today on, you don't live by reflex, but by awareness. Brooke nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. That evening, a video of Brooke's apology and Evelyn's response was posted online. Within hours, it was shared thousands of times with the hashtag Mrs. Evelyn's Porch. But inside the old wooden house on Sycamore Street, Evelyn quietly turned off the lights, stepped out onto the porch, and eased herself into a rocking chair. Still chamomile tea, still the faint glow of porch lights from neighbors. But this time, the breeze felt a little lighter, and the silence, it wasn't erasure, it was acceptance. Just 1 week after the town hall meeting, the sign outside the Brookridge Police Department was taken down for replacement. A temporary board stood beside it, with bold lettering. Under a form, safety is a responsibility, not a privilege. Local TV tickers scrolled with constant updates. The acting police chief announced a sweeping internal investigation. Every stop, use of force report, and citizen complaint over the past 18 months was ordered to be re-reviewed. Several outdated protocols were immediately suspended. The policy of response based on suspicion was placed under review. Police body cameras were now required to be active throughout every interaction. An independent oversight committee was formed, consisting of retired teachers, faith leaders, law students, and local veterans. News of this reached Evelyn May Carter through a short call from Marcus while he was in a meeting in Columbia. It's real, Mom, he said. This time they can't bury it. You're the reason they've started moving. Evelyn smiled, though her eyes remained still, like the surface of a morning lake. They've started, she said softly, but they're not finished, son. She knew that. After 76 years in Brookridge, she understood change doesn't come from a single push. It must be sustained by hands that never tire, eyes that never look away, and faith that holds firm even after it's bled dry. That afternoon, she stepped onto her porch and settled into the same rocking chair as always. A breeze rustled through her silver hair. A young child passing by paused and gnawed politely. A younger neighbor, once indifferent, now approached, placing a basket of flowers on the steps with a small note. Thank you for holding your ground. Evelyn said nothing. She just smiled. For many, this was a victory. But for her, it was merely the beginning. Because she knew justice isn't made by new laws. It's made by how people choose to live with one another after those laws are written. As dusk draped over Brookridge, porch lights flicked on across the neighborhood. The last cicadas of summer chirped in tune, with the town learning to listen to itself again. And amid all that motion, one thing remained unchanged. Evelyn May Carter was still there, on the breezy porch of 142, Sycamore Street. She wore a dark brown sweater, a cup of chamomile tea in hand. No cameras, no crowds, just the sound of wind through maple trees and the scent of damp soil from a light afternoon rain. A small wooden sign hanging from the railing swayed gently. I belong here. No interviews. No photographs. But every passerby paused, if only for a moment. They didn't just see an elderly woman sitting on a porch. They saw a symbol, a reminder, a lantern that never went out. Across the street, Marcus Carter sat in a government SUV, watching his mother through the window. He didn't step onto the porch. He didn't need to. Just seeing her there, still, steady, like the calm before a storm, was enough to remind him, some things are stronger than action. They are presence. Evelyn never fought the world with shouting. She didn't have to stand to prove her dignity. Her silence, her stillness, that was the loudest declaration of all. I am human. I don't need permission to exist. I'm not going anywhere. In an age where too many voices are drowned out, Evelyn chose to remain, not to draw attention, but to hold space, to hold memory, to hold dignity. Like a small oil lamp in a long night, she didn't banish all the dark, but she shone just enough, so the lost would know where they were. And in Brookridge, South Carolina, a place that once mistook silence for surrender, they now know some people sit still not because they're weak, but because they've endured enough to know real strength is when the world must move. Because you won't, Evelyn is still sitting, and she will sit until what's right no longer has to be fought for,